Emma Bork has a strained relationship with her emotionally distant father, Martin. She wants to connect with him, but he's too taken by his grief over his late wife, Kalinka. One day, Emma's going through the couple's old belongings. She finds her dad's old Walkman, along with a picture of her mother. Emma suggests throwing out her mom's stuff, but Martin doesn't want her to. He doesn't even want her to sell Kalinka's old watch, even though it's worth a lot of money. Emma continues making conversation with him and asks who she resembles more, him or mom. To Martin, she got the best of them, so 95% from mom and 5% from him. In a quieter voice, she asks him if he knows that killing oneself is hereditary, and without missing a beat. An increasingly resigned Martin points out that's the missing 5% from her mother. Emma tries asking if he ever thought about seeing someone new, but to her exasperation, Martin ignores her and goes inside his room, where he takes his pills. There's no way around it. Kalinka's death broke something in Martin, and every waking second without her is just a reminder that he isn't whole. Meanwhile, his daughter's left to her own devices. She soon finds some old newspaper clippings about a young couple surviving a night of terror. They were none other than Martin and Kalinka, who were seconds away from death and saved by their friend. There's also a report on former Superintendent Wormer, which talks about his insanity. The following day at university, Emma approaches their teacher, Dr. Berthelsen, and expresses an interest in the open night watch position for the Institute of Forensic Medicine. Though her professor warns her against the job, she insists that she has no imagination and no money, making her perfect for the job. Immediately, Emma heads to the institute and introduces herself to the guard as the new night watch. Annoyed and suspicious of her, the guard shows Emma the flashlight she's supposed to carry everywhere, letting her know they turn off the light at 11 p.m. to save electricity. She then gives the girl a tour of the place and leads her to the autopsy room. As they look around, Emma asks about the story of a night watch, his girlfriend, and some psychotic superintendent that happened years ago. She shares she read about it in a newspaper, to which the guard adds that the killer scalped his victims before violating them. That last bit wasn't revealed to the public. In any case, the assailant gagged the night watch and his girlfriend, whom he brought along. The guard shows Emma the door leading to the old autopsy room where it all went down, but the room is no longer in use. According to another night watch, one can hear the old night watch's girlfriend screaming from there, but the guard tells a very perturbed Emma that the guy was sick in the head too. Back upstairs, Emma asks the guard if it really was the night watch's friend who shot and killed the superintendent. To her shock, the woman reveals that the superintendent, Wormer, only went into a coma. In fact, he's locked away at St. Hans Psychiatric Hospital. Afterwards, Emma hangs out with her friends, Maria, Sophus, and Frederick at a bar. And though they want to go to another place to drink, Emma bails on them since she has to go home to her dad. She would have been better off with her friends though, because she just comes home to the sorry sight of her father asleep on the couch. Emma wakes him up, asking him why he hasn't cooked dinner when he said he would, but he insists that he did make dinner, and doesn't listen when she points out that the oven isn't even on. Anyway, he had a busy day. He visited her mother at their summer home. Martin then goes on about how he's being asked to join the board of directors, but he doesn't want to since he refuses to partake in that hamster wheel. Emma can't believe what he's saying and asks how many pills he's taken, but he just keeps talking over her, prompting her to ask if he knows she exists. When he keeps ignoring her, an increasingly frustrated Emma asks why they don't talk, and Martin's quick to say that they do. The more she talks to her father, the worse she feels, but she keeps going. With a heartbroken look, she desperately asks if she has the genes, but Martin is adamant about Emma being healthy. At this point, she has nothing else to say, so she just informs him there'll be some nights when she won't be coming home because she's working. Why? It's because they don't have a dime. Of course, Martin says he can just get her money, but he's not even on benefits. But for all of his dismissiveness, the man would be stunned into complete silence, as Emma reveals that she applied to be a night watch at the forensics, his old job. She asks if he has anything to say, and when he remains frozen, she leaves. Later on, Emma goes to work, and even displays a photo of her mother on her desk. She only gets distracted when one of the doctors turns off the lights, but she continues to listen to music before taking her flashlight and doing her rounds, dancing around and goofing off while she's alone there. But she soon finds herself in the old autopsy room, where she hears the shrill, blood-curdling shrieks of her mother, calling out for Martin. It's just like the old night watch said, but then again, it could just be her imagination. Spooked, the girl quickly returns to her desk. After her shift, Emma goes to Frederick's house, and after some very playful back and forths, they sleep together. As they rest, she asks Frederick if he was an accident, and he happily answers that there are no accidents in his family, but Emma was. Her mother tended to get very honest when she's drunk, and she was drunk a lot. The woman suffered from intense paranoia, and Kalinka kept saying that there was always someone after her. Her exact words were, "Emma, get out of here. It's coming." Understandably, Emma had no idea what she was talking about, but now, she's starting to think that it is Wormer. Her voice becomes shaky, her eyes melancholic as she shares with Frederick that Kalinka eventually hanged herself, and she was the one who found her mother. Of course, Frederick feels extremely sorry for her, and that's when Emma admits that she wants to go to St. Hans Psychiatric Hospital to meet Wormer. It's because Martin won't tell her anything about the incident, so she hopes the superintendent will. Besides, it might help her dad to see his assailant. In any case, she wants to film Wormer, and expects Frederick to help her. He wants no part of that, but because he's Emma's self-proclaimed hoe, he does it anyway. Like it says on the tin, demons are forever. Years have passed since that night of terror, but it's like Martin is still there. He can't bring himself to do anything but relive his times with his wife, reminisce about her, and in doing so, he's completely neglected his daughter Emma, who just wants him to move on, to actually talk to her and be her father. She's ready to let her mother's belongings go. She wants him to see someone new. But Martin is shackled by his grief and trauma that he just languishes in his house with Emma, or their summer home, and he even refuses to get a job. Martin says he doesn't want to be stuck in a hamster wheel, but what is he trapped in now, if not a hamster wheel of fear, dread, and longing? Trauma is a cycle. Trauma drove Kalinka to take her own life, and she inflicted it upon her daughter when Emma discovered her, perhaps even before. She's been nothing but paranoid, and needlessly honest to her daughter to the point of hurting and troubling her. Now, Emma keeps asking her father, does she have her mother's genes? Does she have that predisposition to take her own life? Meanwhile, Martin is both stuck in that autopsy room and in a constant need to claw out of it and keep his back turned from that time in his life. And in doing so, he's turned his back on Emma, who now believes that the only way she could get to him is by tapping into his past that he's so desperately running away from. And where did the manifestations of Martin's trauma, his everlasting demons, take his daughter? Right to the very place that ruined his life, searching for the very man that haunted her mother, who jumped into death's arms just to free herself from him. And though she was never there, Emma could hear her mother's screams from that night, breaking her away from the fun she was having. Frederick pretends to be Dr. Berthelsen and calls the hospital. He makes up a story that one of his students, Simone Smith, is doing a PhD in forensic psychiatry, and she came across the case of the serial killer and former Detective Superintendent Peter Wormer. With that, is it possible to arrange a meeting between the two? Luckily, the hospital allows Emma to meet Wormer. She then pretends to be Simone Smith and heads to the hospital, where a guard takes her to where Wormer is being kept. As it turns out, the man has a whole section to himself and hasn't been out in 30 years. When asked why he wasn't placed with the loonies, the guard replies that he's harmless. Aside from that, he informs Emma there's no light in that place because Wormer can't stand it. The man is blind, so all he does is sit. Meanwhile, an unhinged-looking young man named Bent quietly follows them. As they near Wormer's room, the guard points out that he listens to the same songs over and over. A nervous Emma wonders if the guard will wait for her outside, but the man only repeats that Wormer isn't dangerous. In fact, he's allowed out in the hallway, but in the guard's 6 years of working there, Wormer never left his room. That said, he gives Emma a call button in case something happens. Opening the door, the guard instructs Emma not to turn on the light. It'll make Wormer scream because he feels it somehow. Eventually, Emma enters Wormer's room while the guard leaves her alone with her family's tormentor. The girl coldly introduces herself to Wormer, whose head hung low. With thinly veiled spite, Emma asks if he remembers her parents, Martin and Kalinka, and she reminds him that he tried to kill them. Since that day, you've been a trauma in their lives. My mom killed herself to get away from you, she whispered in tears. And when he remains unresponsive, she brings out her phone. Emma could scarcely believe it. This pathetic, helpless-looking man is the one that's been haunting their family. She starts taking a video of him, with her phone's flashlighting Wormer's face. Sure enough, the blind man starts wailing, his head following the direction of the light, his sickly face in full display. "Dear Dad, this is Wormer," she bitterly says. Emma goes on to say that she located him to learn everything from the monster that's always haunted him and her, but only these sad remains are left. He's nothing but a withered blind man now. Is he really worth all the suffering? To end the video, she pleadingly tells her dad that it all ends now before spitting on Wormer's face. With that, Emma stops recording and tries to leave, but the door won't open. She bangs on it and presses the button, and while waiting, she examines the killer's belongings, which includes different hair swatches. But unbeknownst to her, Wormer has stood up. She finds an old photo of a kid and decides to take it, along with some other pictures. Next, she tries to open a small box, but Wormer's already behind her. He touches her head, coaxing a yelp from her as she frantically gets away to kick the door open. Thankfully, the guard arrives and opens it for her, unsure why she's reacting that way when the door isn't even locked. To make matters worse, the psychiatrist, Gunvor, sees them and demands Emma to come with her. In the cafeteria, Gunvor threatens to call the cops on her, so Emma admits that Wormer tried to kill her parents before. The psychiatrist's gaze immediately softens when she realizes that she's the daughter of the Night Watch. She then learns about Kalinka killing herself, and Emma's plans of getting answers from Wormer and showing her father there's nothing to be afraid of. Emma also shares that her father uses their summer house as a mausoleum. He goes there 3 times a week to talk to Kalinka, which Emma finds sad. Although she understands her, Gunvor wants Emma to understand that she can't just come to a hospital and record a sick individual. Her actions can be disastrous to Wormer and Martin, but in the girl's defense, she doesn't care about Wormer, and she only wants her father to move on. Gunvor stresses that she could make it worse. Consider if the roles were reversed. What would Wormer's son feel about her recording the dad he lost? From the son's point of view, he might be seeing the whole situation as 2 vigilante upper-class law students, being Martin and his friend, shooting his dad. Everyone interprets things differently. Emma has it hard, but the son's family was destroyed too, and Gunvor notes that executioners' children become executioners and victims' children become victims. Emma snaps that she doesn't want her parents' trauma, but Gunvor notes that here she is as her dad's advocate. She is her dad. After learning what exactly Emma did to their patient, Gunvor asks her to give her calling card to Martin so they can start crisis therapy. After all, Martin is part of Wormer's story, which means he's part of her assignment. Curious, Gunvor asks about Wormer's shooter. Jens, who happens to be Emma's godfather. Emma explains he left her godmother, Lotta, and moved to Thailand. As for Lotta, she became a vicar. Upon learning that, the doctor asks for Emma's information and reminds her to tell Martin to call her. At university, the students are in pairs, dissecting the human body. Frederick decides that it's the best time to ask Emma to be his girlfriend with a Kinder surprise ring, and while she doesn't give a direct answer, the two playfully flirt with each other until Martin suddenly arrives. He stumbles over to Emma and lets her know she doesn't have to work as a night watch anymore because he's got the money they need. Martin has sold Kalinka's watch, and he's willing to sell their car if they need more cash. All he wants is for his daughter to focus on her studies. He talks like he's either drunk or hopped up on something though, and when he notices that the students are examining human body parts, he gets disgusted and loudly begins a random rant. As a result, the teacher asks the students to take a break while Emma pleads him to go home. She refuses to take the money Martin keeps giving her, and when the bills fall to the floor, she finally loses it. A few minutes later, Martin's comforting Emma, and he comments that she looks just like her mom when she cries. Instead of acknowledging his words, she slowly reveals that she's met Wormer. She plays the video on the projector screen, leaving Martin at a complete loss for words. He looks lost, and Emma comes close to tell him about the psychiatrist who wants to meet him. She begs Martin to call Gunvor, but her father simply asks her if she knows what she's done. Now, the killer knows she exists. At this point, Martin can only kiss and embrace his daughter. Even after Martin saw how weak and how far Wormer's fallen, he's still terrified by the very notion of the man knowing his daughter exists. His fears and anxieties aren't grounded in reality anymore. It's not just Wormer that terrifies Martin, but the very thought of the man too. It doesn't matter that the disgraced superintendent is so weak that Emma can just spit on him as she pleases, for Wormer still exists in Martin's mind as the larger-than-hell monster that ravaged his and Kalinka's life. Even if he's several years too late, Martin is still trying for Emma. He's trying to change, be the provider, show her he can finally let go of Kalinka's things. But that isn't enough for Emma. She, above everything, just wants to have her dad as he was, not as the man who was disfigured and misshapen by Wormer's hauntings. Despite Gunvor's warnings, she still showed the recording to Martin, and she really wasn't sympathetic to any of Wormer's plights at all, unlike Gunvor, who was a bit too sympathetic to the killer and his son. It's news to Emma that Wormer has a son, and perhaps he's the child in the photo she found among the man's belongings. Gunvor seems to know a fair bit about the case, and she's rather protective of Wormer and his son. It could be because he's her patient, and as a psychiatrist, she knows how vicious the cycle of trauma is, and how it trickles down to the children. It isn't just genetics, but the circumstances it brings. Moreover, her words were quite ominous. Was she implying that Wormer's son could be an executioner too? At St. Hans Psychiatric Hospital, Bent puts alginate on Wormer's face as the man explains that Scandinavian hair is thicker than other types of hair. Wormer admits he likes Emma's hair because it's not too dry or greasy. Bent finishes his task and removes the dried alginate from Wormer's face, which now has a mold of it. Right after, the door opens, spurring him to look up. Afterward, Bent heads to the church to confront the vicar, Lotta. "It needed to meet with it," is all the young man says, leaving Lotta confused and wondering who he is. As the vicar approaches Bent, she asks him who he's talking about. He shows her the word written on his left hand, which says, Wormer. The terrified woman flees to her car, not knowing that someone is already inside, wearing the mask Bent made. Lotta quickly drives away and desperately tries to call Martin. Her call goes straight to voicemail, but she still lets him know that a very strange person came to see her. To make things worse, Bent blocks the way, preventing Lotta from passing through the gate. It isn't long before the masked stranger slits Lotta's throat. Once the vicar's body is discovered in her vehicle, Bent is immediately arrested, as he's walking around the area with blood all over his face and hands. On Friday morning, Superintendent Kramer interviews Bent and asks what he did with Lotta's scalp. While the young man replies that it belongs to it, Kramer's colleague, Trondheim, wonders how he was allowed to leave the psychiatric unit. According to Bent's psychiatrist Gunvor, he's been allowed out on day release since his medication works. He's also one of her most harmless patients. Back inside the interrogation room, Kramer shows Bent a picture of the vicar he killed. On Bent's right hand, she notices a simple map drawing showing the route to the church, which he very happily claims was drawn by it. Kramer asks if it is the force inside him that's making him do things before showing him a photo of Wormer, who enjoys scalping women too. Wormer will be pissed off with a copycat killer stealing his scalps, she says, spurring Bent to ask if it is pissed off. Bent sounds like he's sobbing at first, but when he lifts his head, he's laughing like a madman. Without warning, he shows everyone what's written on his left hand before repeatedly banging his head on the one-way mirror, breaking it. Wasting no time, the authorities, including Gunvor and Dr. Berthelsen, go to the Institute of Forensic Medicine to check the vicar's body. Emma follows them to the autopsy room, where, upon seeing the victim's scalped head, she recognizes Wormer's signature. Kramer wants to know how she knew that, but instead of answering the question, she surprises everyone by revealing the victim is her godmother. Gunvor's quick to take her outside, where she asks everyone if Wormer has escaped. Kramer reminds her that Wormer is blind, while Trondheim states they have the perpetrator, who's a copycat. Gunvor hypothesizes that the fatherless Bent found a strong father figure in Wormer, but Emma still can't figure out why the young man would target her godmother. Kramer then asks if she still lives with Martin, and if her father has seen Lotta. But in the end, she decides to stop questioning Emma when the girl demands to know if the killer is Wormer's son. However, as they all walk away, she stops to ask Emma if she's crazy like Martin. When the girl says that her father's going through a tough time, Kramer looks like she can't give a rat's tush about that fact. She also emphasizes they're back to where it all started because she visited Wormer. Without letting up, Kramer asks if she has relatives in Tasmania, only to sneer and leave when she's met by the students' confusion. In a hospital the following day, Bent cuts his head wound open with a shard of glass. Unfortunately, the noise is blocked off by the joyous little parade the patients are having. He takes advantage of the parade by covering his face with blood, blending in with the group, and leaving the hospital. Back at the institute, Maria switches places with Emma and wears her uniform so she can leave. Meanwhile, Bent takes some hammers, a maintenance man's clothes, and a chain before cleaning himself up in the restroom of the institute. At home, Martin actually made dinner for Emma. He calls her sweetie and invites him to join her, even apologizing for showing up unannounced to uni. In turn, Emma stiffly informs him that Lotta has been killed. Martin is confused, but he remembers missing her call earlier and claims he meant to call her back. He then plays the woman's message and realizes that Lotta actually left it yesterday. Through the voice message, he hears her getting killed, leaving Martin shell-shocked. Scared for her father, Emma grabs his phone and stops the message from playing. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door, but Emma doesn't see anyone in the hallway when she checks through the peephole. When Martin opens the door, Jens pops up, startling the two of them, but they waste no time and let him listen to Lotta's message. As it turns out, Lotta still had his number on her fridge, which is why the authorities were able to contact him. Jens is surprised to learn that Emma works as a night watch at the institute, the same place where her parents experienced horrible things. But that aside, he hopes that Emma and Martin will go to dinner with him to catch up on things. Jens is very crass and insensitive. He keeps poking fun at Martin and his substance dependency. He also keeps mentioning Kalinka and what she did, despite Martin and Emma's clear discomfort. That night, the three head to the institute to see Lot. Emma's friends are partying at Maria's station, and Frederick eagerly introduces himself to Martin as Emma's boyfriend. The girl, however, wants their partying to stop, so Sophus and Frederick leave while Emma takes the men to see Lotta. A solemn Jens simply touches her face, but doesn't say anything. Emma asks Maria afterward to stay a couple more hours for her, not knowing that Bent is in the building. In a restaurant, Jens continues with his crude and insensitive remarks. He keeps talking about what happened that night, and he goes into detail at Emma's insistent request, much to Martin's chagrin. He reveals his missing thumb and explains that Wormer handcuffed his hand to a pipe, then hogtied Martin and Kalinka in the old autopsy room. When the serial killer left the room, Jens saw Martin's knife on the table and used it to cut off his thumb before freeing himself. Next, he took the dead policeman's gun, and when he came upstairs, he saw that Wormer was ready to saw into Martin. For all of his bluster, the story makes Jens emotional, so Martin hugs him. He can't say anymore, though she'd love to hear more. Emma tells the men she's going back to the institute, and affectionately thanks Jens for everything he's done. Now that Jens is with them, Wormer's victims from that night of terror is complete. He has a different coping method from Martin, whereas his friend is paralyzed and avoidant. Jens tries to be blasé about it, but his feelings showed through in the end, and he's just as messed up as Martin is even after all those years. But now that they're reunited, they could have a shot at healing better, and healing together. Unfortunately, Bent's still on the prowl, and the killer's still on the loose. During their interrogation, Kramer made Bent out to be the sole perpetrator of the case. She's implying that he has something like schizophrenia, or some form of personality disorder. But of course, the audience knows that Bent was just an accessory to the crime, a scapegoat even. The real killer wore a mask and had rubber gloves on, so they left no trace of themselves, while Bent was left there covered in Lotta's blood. As for who the real killer could have been, it may be Wormer. The mask was made to fit his face perfectly, and Bent was supposedly killing under his name since it was written on his hand. He was talking about loving Emma's hair too, which gives him the motive to leave the institute. And finally, he targeted Lotta, who was the significant other of Jens, Martin's friend, and the one who shot him. But like Kramer said, Wormer's blind. He wouldn't have been able to do that, and it's hard to imagine how he knows about Lotta. Now who knows about Lotta? Gunvor does. Emma told her that her godmother Lotta was a vicar, and wouldn't you know it, the woman died soon after. She's also the one who gave Bent his day release, on account of him being one of her more harmless patients. Based on everything Bent's done, he's clearly mentally unstable. He isn't sound of mind, but he hasn't actually harmed Lotta. It also begs the question, what motive would Gunvor even have? What would she achieve by killing Lotta? Then, there's Kramer. Like Gunvor, who's very familiar with Wormer's story, the superintendent knows more than she's letting on given the way she questioned Emma. She knows that Emma's living alone with Martin and that he's unwell. When the girl told her about how her father's doing, Kramer showed contempt. So for whatever reason, Kramer doesn't seem to like Martin. It should also be noted that she is a superintendent like Wormer was, and Wormer used his police position to carry out his crimes. Kramer also asked Bent leading questions, basically painting him out to have a voice in his head telling him to commit crimes. But again, what motive would Kramer have? What would she gain from killing Lotta? At the institute, Maria plays loud music again while cleaning up. She then explores the place when she notices the elevator light turning on, unaware it's Bent's doing. When Emma arrives, she turns off the music before looking for her. While all this is happening, Jens and Martin sneak into a soccer stadium to play and forget about the past, even for just a moment. Live out the lives they were supposed to live had Wormer not hijacked them. Jens then leaves first, but Martin stays behind to play some more. In the street, a masked stranger walks up to Jens and slits his throat. Sadly, Jens can only look at the person who attacked him, and as he dies, he ends up getting scalped too. The The following day, a worried Emma tells Sophus and Frederick that Maria is missing. The girl isn't answering her phone, so Emma wants to report her disappearance to the police and contact her parents. However, Maria doesn't really talk to her parents, and because she's only been missing for a few hours, the cops probably won't do anything. What they don't know is that their friend is being held captive in a secluded house, beaten and restrained. Maria demands to be released the moment she sees Bent, but the young man only laughs at her, realizing her aggression won't get her anywhere. Maria tries to befriend her captor and even shares her name with him. To her surprise, Bent insists that her name is Emma, not Maria. He thought she was Emma because she was in the reception area wearing a white coat, but he stops talking to announce that the detective superintendent is back. Sure enough, the masked stranger enters the house and stares at Maria, who defiantly states they got the wrong girl. While Martin leaves to see Gunvar at the psychiatric hospital, Emma sees his note and checks the photos she stole from Wormer's room. Kramer then shows up at their house to inform her that Jens was found dead that morning. The horrified girl is in disbelief, but Kramer redirects her attention. Since Emma said that Martin went to see Gunvar, Kramer wants to go there too. Taking one of the photos she stole from Wormer, Emma tells Kramer she thinks Wormer's son is taking revenge on them. But the superintendent says Wormer never had a son, which means the kid in the picture was a girl. The man must have cut his daughter's hair off, for she lived alone with him after her mother disappeared. The word is that she went crazy and ended up in care. The authorities only discovered that she was being mistreated by her foster father after she killed him. For Kramer, it's possible that Wormer's daughter is taking revenge, and she might be living under a different name. Again, Kramer asks Emma an odd question and wonders if she's seen long-lost family, but she doesn't wait for her answer, and just tells her they must leave now. In the secluded house, Maria manages to gain Bent's trust by mimicking the way he talks. She makes him lie on her lap before slowly wrapping her chain around his neck, thus strangling him to death. Around the same time, Martin reaches Gunvar's office and talks to the psychiatrist about his life with Emma. Gunvar implies that his silence is what forced his daughter to seek Peter Wormer out, surprising Martin that she's referring to the killer using his first name. The psychiatrist asks how he thinks Wormer's child feels, and that piece of information shocks him even more. Moments later, Emma manages to contact Maria. The girl answers her phone through Siri and quickly tells Emma she and her father are in danger. She also adds she's been kidnapped, and while the person who took her is dead, the superintendent is coming back. Maria reveals that the person behind everything is the superintendent and that she's after Emma, terrifying the girl. As the two drive in the rain, Gunvar stresses that Wormer and his daughter suddenly remembered everything that happened because of Emma. It is then revealed that the person responsible for Maria's kidnapping was Gunvar, and not Kramer, and she only left when she received a call from Martin. Maria simply misunderstood Bent when he referred to Gunvar as the superintendent, probably because he was thinking about Wormer, but Martin has no idea about it, and it's only now that he realizes that the psychiatrist put something in his drink because he suddenly can't move. Before he knows it, he's already in handcuffs. Gunvar wheels him to Wormer's room and leaves him there. Once they're alone, a suited-up Wormer shows Martin the scalps he's collected through the years, saying that they kept him from feeling lonely. Meanwhile, Emma bolts out of the car as soon as they reach the hospital and yells at the guard to call the cops. She desperately calls Gunvar and tells her she thinks Kramer is Wormer's daughter, letting her know she's outside her office. Soon, the psychiatrist finds her, but Kramer catches up with her too. Ignoring the superintendent, Gunvar takes Emma's hand and runs away with her, making her hide in one of the rooms before facing Kramer. As Kramer approaches, Gunvar swiftly slits her throat with a box cutter, which Emma witnesses. She claims the superintendent was going to shoot them, prompting Emma to call her father. Much to her shock, Gunvar has Martin's phone. That's all the confirmation she needs. Emma tries to bolt out of there, but the psychiatrist uses a remote control to close the hallway door. The girl hurriedly flees to another corridor and hides behind a pillar until Gunvar walks past her. While Emma is trying to avoid Gunvar's clutches, Martin manages to get away from Wormer, who's about to scalp him. The medicine finally wore off. He slowly crawls away and doesn't make a sound, all while the serial killer searches for him. When Wormer finally finds him, Martin uses all his strength to grab the man's hand and stabs him in the neck. He hurries out of the room and hears Emma calling for help from somewhere within the hospital, forcing him to get up and look for her. Ultimately, Martin finds Emma. The only problem is that Gunvar finds them too, even removing her eerily clacking heels to run faster. To protect themselves, Emma grabs Kramer's gun and continues to flee with her father. She also sees what happened to Wormer as they run past his room, and that sight infuriates Gunvar even more. Now filled with rage, the psychiatrist runs toward Emma and Martin with her blade, leaving the girl with no other choice but to repeatedly shoot her. It took long and several years, but finally, it's over. The police comes, and all Emma and Martin can do is hug each other. Days pass, and the two are enjoying their time at the beach. Emma's friends are there too. Sophus announces he finally slept with Maria, and Martin goes on ahead to the sea. He invites the four to go along, and Emma follows them last, holding Frederick's hand as they play in the water. While both Martin and Wormer became shells of their former selves, Emma and Gunvar had the drive to keep moving forward. The ironic thing is, everything they did to move forward just brought them back to where their parents fell, the Institute. Since Emma opened that Pandora's box, Gunvar took it upon herself to kill in her father's name, to exact revenge upon the people who destroyed her family and brought her to a dark place where she was mistreated, a place where murder was her only way out. At least, that's how it looked like for her. She said it herself, people interpret things differently, and being meta about it didn't help her be more objective. Gunvar's just like Emma in that regard. Emma outright said that she doesn't care if what she did would make things worse for Wormer. She has nothing but contempt for him, the same way Gunvar has nothing for Martin and Jens but murderous hatred. They're both daughters of ruined men and men who ruined, daughters whose lives were surrounded by so much suffering. While Gunvar continued the cycle of an executioner, Emma broke the cycle of victimhood as she killed the last remnant of Wormer. While she and Martin are undoubtedly changed by that experience, for the better in many aspects, and perhaps for the worse in others, the two can finally live freely, without fearing the invisible guest in their house, the demon that kept haunting them.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.